All right, everyone, welcome back. So we're about ready to get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our twice rescheduled Racial Equity Committee today on February 17th. It's been so long since we've seen everybody, so it's nice to see everyone, and it's really nice that we didn't get snowed out again, and we are super lucky because we missed it just by a tad. So we're going to get started. I want to get started by just recognizing that it is Black History Month, in addition to our Asian friends just celebrating the Chinese New Year. So we just want to give a quick shout out to everyone of various cultures, being that we are the Racial Equity Committee. And we did want to take some time based upon Frederick County's move into hybrid as of yesterday. And we wanted to take some time to recognize we all have so much going on in our lives right now. That we wanted to get started with a little community builder as to why we're on this committee and why we do what we do. So right now, Dawn, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could go ahead and share a little bit of our video. Our video is of Clint Smith, who is a published author and as well as a poet. He is fantastic if you haven't yet seen his work. He is actually a teacher locally for PG County. He lives in PG County. He currently teaches writing and literature at the DC Central Detention Facility. He's received a bachelor's degree in English from Davidson College, and he has a doctorate in education from Harvard University. So right now we're going to hear some quick words from Clint Smith. And as we look at this video, we ask you to look at it through the lens of why we do what we do on this committee. Go ahead, Dawn.
Thank you. I'm going to need you to stop sharing your screen for me for a sec.
Jr. in a 1968 speech where he reflects upon the civil rights movement states, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." As a teacher, I've internalized this message. Every day all around us, we see the consequences of silence manifest themselves in the form of discrimination, violence, genocide, and war. In the classroom, I challenge my students to explore the silences in their own lives through poetry. We work together to fill those spaces, to recognize them, to name them, to understand that they don't have to be sources of shame. In an effort to create a culture within my classroom where students feel safe sharing the intimacies of their own silences, I have 4 core principles posted on the board that sits in the front of my class, which every student signs at the beginning of the year. Read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, tell your truth. I find myself thinking a lot about that last point, tell your truth. And I realized that if I was going to ask my students to speak up, I was going to have to tell my truth and be honest with them about the times where I failed to do so. So I tell them that growing up as a kid in a Catholic family in New Orleans, during Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up. Sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand his sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I had spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything, appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau, and just because you watch one episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know anything about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice? Thank you.
Thank you, Don. So what we'd like to do now is open the floor up to talk a little bit about what resonated you with that video and how does it relate to the work we do on the Racial Equity Committee. Feel free to go ahead and unmute.
I feel like racial equity is like, or racism and all the conversations around are very uncomfortable sometimes. So I think I'll reflect that, or I've let things go, been angry after the fact, and sort of didn't want to challenge anything or cause it. So I think it's something probably.
Keisha, you were coming in a little fuzzy, so I don't know if you can get to another spot in your home, or we couldn't hear you very well.
Okay, let's see.
But Keisha, we want to hear what you say, so feel free to unmute when you're ready. And then anyone else, how does this video of Clint Smith relate to our work in the Racial Equity Committee?
Good evening, everybody. This is Andrea. I was so moved. I'm in tears. I remember 27 years ago when I decided to be an educator. I did so because I said it wasn't political, that being an educator would keep me out of trouble. But little did I realize that what I was speaking to were the silences of my growing up in the Deep South and having my history silenced, except for bouts of discussions about slavery being talked about for years as someone who was powerless, and sort of carrying on that tradition myself as an educator, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know any better. Because out of the, 12 years that I went to school, racial equity never came up in the conversation. And so now that I've begun to engage in this work, going on, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now, since I've been fortunate enough to teach at Frederick Community College, and the opportunities just kept coming up for us to talk about race and to talk about issues that were hard, that I see it as my responsibility and my obligation, not just on this committee, but in the classroom, to open up those spaces that were silent for students, to empower them and to give them voice to share their stories. It is an honor to be here with you and to do this work.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for your vulnerability. Would anyone else like to share how this video relates to the work we're doing? So for me, when I saw this video, there were a couple things that Clint Smith said that stuck with me. One of his phrases was, "Silence is the residue of fear." And sometimes we say what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. And that, to me, is the core of what we're doing on our committee. So what we want to leave with today is a feeling of that we serve a purpose here in the Frederick community for our students. And we want to make sure that we are letting people hear what they need to hear. And we need, even though as parents, as community members, as teachers, or whatever role we might serve in the community, this change is hard. We're continuing to live through a global pandemic, and now more change is coming as schools opened this week. And now more than ever, our work is so important. So within that same vein, what I'm going to do is, Keisha, we also want to hear what you said. So whenever you're ready, please go ahead and just send a message through the chat, and we'll be ready. And then
for later, can you hear me better here, or is it still bad?
Actually, that was I heard it clearly. I mean, if anyone else heard, maybe give a thumbs up, and then what we can also do. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna take off my video so that maybe that will reduce the bandwidth a little bit. So I'm just gonna take off my video so maybe just.
Yeah, and I said something similar to what you said. I think it's definitely the silence that resonates. I think conversations about race and racism are uncomfortable sometimes, and so I know in my past I've had times where instead of sort of really raising an issue and rocking the boat, you sort of let things go. And I know when I reflect back on those times, I get frustrated with myself because I'm like, it was an opportunity. And so it really resonates, really making sure we're using our voice all the time. And I think, in this endeavor, we really need to do that, because if we're not comfortable telling our truth, we're not going to make progress on this issue.
Thank you, Keisha, for sharing. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, before we move forward, or Vice Chair, excuse me, is it possible for us to just approve the minutes or the agenda for tonight's meeting?
Yes, thank you, Dawn. I'm going to go ahead and let me go back to the tab really quickly on this computer here. Hold on 1 second, it should come up. Whoops, no, stop. There we go. Yep, so sorry, Dawn, I skipped that step. So the meeting was called to order at 6:04. At 6:04. Thank you guys for your patience. This is obviously my first time doing this. Meeting was called to order at 6:04. And can we get a motion to approve our December 16th, 2020 minutes?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from December 16th, 2020. I need a second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you.
All right, so up on our screen is our agenda for this evening. We just approved the minutes. Thank you, Don, for keeping us on track. We're going to hear from our new board member liaison. We're additionally going to hear hold a special election this evening, as it was noted in our email to you all this evening. And then we will also hear some updates from the executive subcommittee. We'll continue to review our subcommittee work. We'll have some questions, comments, and discussions at the end. And then we'll review some action items that are left over for us to get going on, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get going with public comments. So due to the health situation that our community is currently experiencing, the February 17th Racial Equity Committee meeting will take place via teleconference. Should anyone wish to provide public comment, please send an email that includes your full name to fcpsracialequity@fcps.org prior to the start of the meeting. The Racial Equity Committee welcomes and encourages public comment. Public comments will be read for up to 30 minutes. However, all public comment, whether read or not, will be posted on board docs within 24 hours of the meeting. Please note that public comment is for statements and questions and will be directed to the appropriate staff for response. So our first public comment is from Samantha Porter. She states, FCPS Equity Committee, and to whom it may concern. We have been having frequent committee meetings at North Frederick Elementary School called the Voices Committee, where we are currently earning an MSDE credit with a book study, as well as discussing together how we can begin to set goals to better serve our students who are historically marginalized groups. We would like to align what we are working on with FCPS's broader goals in equity after reviewing the goal of including this anti-racist curriculum. We hope to hear frequent updates about the progress and when our staff can expect this curriculum to be ready for students. We hope these notes will be shared among principals and via emails so that teachers are not expected to find and look through the board doc notes in order to be aware of these exciting changes to our curricula. Thank you, NFES Voices Committee, Samantha Porter, Ayana Tompkins, Laura Jones, Carol Bridges, Tara Hudson, Heather Brown, Samantha Cullen, Kim Gameloto, Lauren Carlisle, and Marina Warren Phelps. From Samantha Porter. Public comment number 2 is from Lisa Broomfield. I am embarrassed that I neglected to hit send this morning before going to work, but I do want the committee members to receive these comments. Thanks for your work. Please read this comment request at your meeting tonight, January 20th, 2021. Dear members of the Racial Equity Committee, thank you for your work toward increased equity in Frederick County Public Schools. I am writing to ask that you help craft a policy or change current policy that would affect SROs being sent to the home of students. I find this practice to be of great concern and worry about possible negative outcomes, such as the practice particularly at the homes of Black and Brown students. Please create or change a policy about this practice to include the following: clear criteria that would necessitate a visit from an SRO to the home of a student, who is accountable for that decision, and that this decision is made by more than one person, at least one of whom is a school counselor, social worker, or therapist. The policy should also require that FCPS provides monthly data about this practice, like how often these visits happen, whether they happen in tandem with another school employee or just the SRO, how often an arrest happens during these visits, and how often the visit results in use of the 287G program. Thank you for helping to further clarify and oversee this use of SROs at FCPS. Sincerely, Lisa Broomfield, Middletown, Maryland. Our third public comment is from Dinah Price. Racial Equity Committee. After several weeks of speaking to different FCPS staff to understand where our county and community schools stand on performance in educating African American males and females, we still have limited information. We were told that data on African American students according to gender requires a special request. Our principal requested this information weeks ago, and we still have not received a response. We are left to wonder why data so easily accessible is so hard to release. Transparency is required to establish trust within the community. How do we get to where we need to be in terms of racial equity if we do not know where we stand today? Respectfully, Dinah Price. And our final public comment is from Ronnie Beard. Good evening. I wanted to give public comment on subcommittee work group that is being discussed at tonight's meeting with regards to Regulation 300-1, hiring, recruitment, and retention of staff. In order for FCPS to attract and recruit educators of color into FCPS, the process of open contracts to future employees needs to be looked at and revised in order to compete with surrounding districts. Graduates are looking for jobs before they can graduate from their undergraduate programs and graduate programs for education, and are looking for interviews and job opportunities before they are confirmed from the university. Other districts around the state are swooping in and giving these graduates open contracts for employment way before we can get through the first phase of the recruitment process and interviews because we are waiting. Each year, there are resignations, retirements, and leaves of absences that leave gaps for people to fill, and we are consistently behind the 8 ball on trying to diversify our staff within FCPS. We also have support staff within FCPS trying to become teachers within our system. They are going through their coursework and working at the same time in the system, giving their loyalty to the school system. When it comes to the hiring process to become a teacher in the system, it feels like they have to jump through more hoops to get to the interview stage at buildings. They are potentially the best candidates for the position, because they have been in the system for some time to know the ins and outs of how FCPS operates. There is nothing to incentivize our own support employees to stay with FCPS at an early stage in their careers when they can go to surrounding counties and get a higher level of starting pay. In Howard County, they incentivize their support employees by placing them on a scale with up to 10 years of service in the county. When they become a teacher in Howard County, they could potentially start on a step 7. If they have been in the county for that long as a support employee and made the transition to become a teacher, they see the benefit of growing from within their own ranks to be a stronger system as a whole. They are able to retain those employees down the road because they were awarded for their longevity within the system. These are just a few suggestions that I have for a comment tonight. Thank you for your time and take care, Ronnie Beard Jr. Thank you all for your public comments. Right now, what we're going to do is officially, we know he somewhat introduced himself during our last meeting, but we officially want to introduce Mr. David Bass. He is now our board member liaison for the Racial Equity Committee, as Mr. Mason has now become president of the Board of Education. So now Mr. David Bass will take his place. So David, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I was on the December call with you all, but there's a few things I want to discuss tonight, both that are on my mind and updates from the board that I want to share. And I think I just want to start by, we know that this week is the week that hybrid learning has started. And I think I just want to share the the heaviness of this decision. It has been, board members, we have heard from many concerned teachers and parents, and I both want to share. There certainly was a heaviness with considering all the concerns brought forward. I'll share, I'll share some of my thoughts around, certainly my support for moving in this direction, both in terms of students accessing the in-person instruction, and really ensuring, that students, particularly students who, particularly, families who, in some cases may not have the same resources, the need for students to have some of the in-person instruction. But two things that I wanted to ensure that everyone kind of know that I've been working on and doing some advocacy on. I really think that as a county, we've fallen short on the vaccine advocacy, and I've been doing some advocacy towards our state delegation. I really think that the vaccines need to be done through county health departments, and the governor has kind of made the decision to go with these mass vaccination sites and to go with sending vaccines to some of these, the CVS's and the Walgreens and the Giant. And so, I have a lot of concerns about that in terms of equity, in terms of access. And so I did want to share with our committee, that I've written to our state delegation with my interest that they really push the governor on this. That vaccine distribution, I think, through the county health department is how this can be the most equitable, including for FCPS staff. I'll also share that, I think that I'll leave that I'll leave that there for now. I want to let you all know that I'm also starting some school visits. I did 2 school visits in December, but now, obviously these school visits will be with students there, and I'll get to see Ballinger Creek Elementary and Crestwood Middle both this week and the next week. I'm really excited because I got an opportunity or I made a request to see some of the Black History Month lessons that teachers are doing, and so this has been something I've been thinking about because, frankly, a year ago I was at the board, during public comment as a citizen, really, advocating that we ensure that teachers are doing more for Black History Month. And so, I mean, there's been a small movement with that where right now teachers are required, expected to, have two lessons for Black History Month. But I think I really will want to know more from our committee and from others, just on what can, it's, that it doesn't feel like the right way to frame. Doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like the right way to frame expectations around Black History Month. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure the best ways to ensure that we're doing more for Black History Month. And so this is something that I'll certainly want to hear from people on. I mean, along those lines, I want to start holding office hours, and I think that some of that will be in schools, partnering with either community organizations or with schools to have some office hours, maybe once a month at different schools, But if you are involved in community organization, or if there's somewhere where you think I should be speaking and hearing from parents and teachers and community members, please let me know. I think everyone on this committee has access points in the community that I really want to tap into. I think the final thing that I wanted to touch on is right. So since it has been 2 months since we've met as a committee, the FCPS budget, right, has come out and gone from us to the county executive and the county council. And I do think that it puts a good emphasis, maybe more of an emphasis, on mental health positions, on trauma-informed therapists, on some academic, I don't know, I'm missing the word, but some academic services around catch-up that I think will be important. But I will really want to hear feedback from this committee on your thoughts on the budget. So, I mean, there are some budget documents on the website, and I really hope you'll give me some feedback on your thoughts on the budget. So I'll leave it there for now. But please be in touch at any and all times. And I'll put my email and I think I'll also put my phone number in the chat. And please be in touch. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and go back to sharing my screen, and we'll get going with the next portion of our meeting. So as many of you know, thank you, David, for working on putting that in the chat. We appreciate it. So as many of you know, our former chair of our committee, Marv Mills, did have to step down from our committee due to health reasons. And we send him all warm thoughts and all like virtual hugs and love his way. So unfortunately, because Marv had to step down, our seat for chair of the Racial Equity Committee is now open. So right now, David, oh, perfect. I see you put it in the chat. Thank you. David, I'm actually going to return it back over to you for the remaining portion of this slide.
Yeah. So I'm really excited that we have a nomination, or a letter put in from Ms. Keisha Koa to be the next chair of the Racial Equity Committee. And her letter really spoke to her experience leading diverse groups, connecting with a variety of stakeholders, facilitating conversations around complex issues. And I'm thrilled that Ms. Keisha Koa put herself forward for the role of chair of the Racial Equity Committee.
Is there anyone else that may be considering running for the position of chair in addition to Ms. Koa? So I know at my union meetings, we have to ask the question 3 times just to make sure we didn't miss anybody. So I'm going to ask 2 more times. Is there anyone else interested in running for the chair of the Racial Equity Committee? Okay, is there anyone interested in running along with Keisha Koa for the chair of the Racial Equity Committee? Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to just by the way things are, and I'm very excited as well. I'd like to make a motion to have Keisha Koa represent us as our chair for the Racial Equity Committee. Oh, look at that. I do need a second, I believe.
I second.
All those, I guess, in favor would say aye, I guess.
Aye.
Aye.
I think so, yeah.
Hi.
Aye.
That's awesome. Keisha, was there anything you wanted to share?
Just thank you. I'm socially awkward, so that's why I was like, I'm waiting to turn my video on. but I very much enjoy working on this committee and look forward to being able to serve in even a more in-depth way. So I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Keisha.
Thank
All
you.
right. So we are so excited to have you. So definitely you'll receive an email probably from all of us on the exec subcommittee, and we will start our little text chain so you can get bothered by all of our text messages as well. So thank you so much, Keisha. All right. So congratulations, Keisha. And now we're going to move on to the executive subcommittee updates. We do have a few updates that we wanted to give everyone. Again, we meant to give them months ago, but then we got rescheduled. So really quickly, because I know we were running a little bit shorter on time. Dawn, I'm going to turn it over to you to just quickly review the status of where we are in changing our bylaws to include our student members, because now that Mr. Bass is our official board member liaison, since we had that change in power a little bit, can you talk to us, Dawn, a little bit about where we are as far as changing our bylaws?
So a small team of us met about 2 months ago, and we did come up with a bylaw amendment to include up to 3 student members. And we have a draft that's all ready. And I shared our draft with Board Member Bass last night. And so we're really excited for him to bring that to the Board of Education, so that we can go ahead and open up positions to have more student members. One thing we did talk about and we learned was the need to listen to our student voices. And that is the one population that's missing right now on this committee. We need to hear from the students that are actually in our schools. And from listening to the words over the summer, from listening to our student panel speak that first week in February for Black Lives Matter at Schools Week, our students are critical and they have much to share and much we can learn from them. So it was really important for us to enact that, put that language in, and present it to the board so that it can actually occur.
Thank you, Dawn. Really quickly, we're also going to go over, we did have Marv, as I said, who respectfully resigned since our last meeting. However, in the midst of that as well, we did have 2 other members, community members of our committee, additionally resign, equaling a total of 3 members resigning since we last met. This is why we started and framed our meeting as we did this evening, because even though as community members we are going through so much right now and living through so much, it's really just important for us to realize the importance of the work we do, because as our students return back into the school buildings, we need to know that our work is really going to become even that much more important as we start to come out of this global pandemic. With that being said, with the remaining 2 community member spots that are open, David, I was actually going to spontaneously pass it on to you if you could discuss the process of what we're going to go through as a committee to look at those 2 open spots we have for the community members.
Sure, and let me know if you think I missed anything from from our previous conversation on this. But yeah, I'm sending the bylaws to the rest of the Board of Education, and I anticipate those will be approved. Although that's the student member side. We're going to go through a similar process in terms of the application that we went through to get our initial members on the Racial Equity Committee. And Catherine, who serves as administrative assistant to the board, is going to be putting out that application. And we want to have that open for a month. And yeah, I mean, once we have the applicants, I think we will go through the same process that we went through, I guess, in 2019. I guess when you all first got on the board, or on this committee, where board members will review the applicants. When we were talking about this yesterday, I mean, it could take several months. And that's why we're going to get started with that now. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Right now, we're going to go ahead and go over. I know we brought this up at our last meeting, but just as a refresher, a lot of our work on this committee as a whole, a lot of our work happens outside of these meetings when we meet with our subcommittees. So that's when we're really, really putting in the work to make the changes and the structural changes that we want to see to ensure that FCPS in our community is serving our student populations who have been historically marginalized. So a part of that work that we do in our subcommittees is taking a look at, whoops. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on one second. Is making sure that when we, here we go, here it is. Okay, perfect. That when our subcommittees are proposing various changes to policies, that we're using this form. It was sent out a couple times via email to our committee as a whole, and we will be sending it out again following this committee as a whole meeting. But when we're proposing changes, our goal is for this form to be completed. And then this form gets submitted to David as our Board of Education representative. He then passes it along to the policy committee, and then they look over it to make possible adjustments, changes, and revisions. So what I wanted to do quickly is I'm going to throw this quickly into the chat box for everyone so that everybody has it. Oops. And I'm going to share it again via email as well following this committee meeting. But if you take a look just really quickly, it goes through the policy number that's related that it is that your subcommittee is looking at. It goes through the related regulations. And remember, the regulations, that's how this change is going to happen, how it's going to look in the schools. The policy number is the what we want to happen. So as a whole committee, we want to in subcommittee, we want to change the what. The superintendent will then take a look at the regulation and say, this is the how we're going to do it. So what we want to make sure we have is the related regulations that are kind of tied to the policies that we're looking at as subcommittees. And then what's super important, and thank you, Sabrina, for taking a look at this form and kind of making some adjustments to it and helping us out. What's really important is this third piece right here, the purpose or intent of the request. Because what we want to make sure that we know is when we send this to the policy committee, what is the intent we have behind the change? Because then the policy committee will ensure that it's worded with that intent in mind. So we aren't necessarily the wordsmiths for the policy, which I think is what we kind of got stuck on last time. We kind of got stuck on the, how is this going to look and what words should we use? But now we know after clarification that what we really want is to send this to the policy committee with what our intent is. And then it's the policy committee's job to then go ahead and reword things to make it with that, so that this future change in the policy has the impact and the intent behind what we want. And then additionally, down below, you'll see that it does have supporting documents if you have any supporting documents. So such as if you're working on the data subcommittee and you have data from our kiddos that support this change in this policy. Well, that's something that you might want to link up in here and what you might want to include as a PDF when we send this to David. And then additionally, there is a spot down here. Whoops. There is a spot down here for board liaison comment. So that might be where David might add in some of the discussions that we had when your change in this form is brought to the committee as a whole to take a look at. It is important when you're completing this form that you do write your point of contact for your subcommittee. And just remember that your point of contact isn't Keisha or myself or Dawn. The point of contact is the point of contact for your subcommittee. That's the person that we want to make sure David is then knowing who it is. So David can go back and say, hey, Shanita, or hey, Sarah, this is the discussion that took place. So he knows who to go back to and to talk to. Are there any questions or any points of clarification that might be needed regarding this form?
Can I just share also, if you go back up to supporting documents or consider supporting documents, if you have supporting documents from another local school system, maybe they worded something different or have a different intent, just to share with the committee so that they know where some of your resources came from. That is also helpful for that committee so that they can see what some of your intent was based off of.
Thank you, Sabrina, for adding that. Are there any other questions about how we are going to use this form? I'm using my teacher wait time. No, so.
Hey, Elisa, I do have a question.
Yes.
This is Tia. So when we send this document in, providing an outline of the purpose, intent, and the supporting documents, and then the policy committee then crafts an actual policy, will we have the opportunity to then review what they put together so that we can ensure that that's really we're on the same page in terms of, intent and impact and what it all looks like in the end?
Also, I'm going to say yes. I want to figure out how we do this to ensure that it always happens. But I'm serving on the policy committee as well, and so there's an opportunity for I don't know, both for me to speak directly at the policy committee on what we're discussing here, but then also I don't know. I think then I hope and think. And I think I may want to talk through this with Jay just to make sure I'm thinking about this right. But that once it's at the policy committee, that there is still an opportunity for us to. It's hard, right? I mean, once the policy committee passes something, ideally it should go directly from there to the board of that, to the board. So yeah, I will talk. Yeah, it's hard. Right. I don't want to say no, but I see Sabrina's raising her hand.
So let me share that the policy committee is also open for public comment. So when one of our policies are being reviewed, I would recommend that someone from the Racial Equity Committee, if it's in person, either attend for public comment to address the policy committee directly, or again, provide written public comment to the policy committee. Then once it's approved by the policy committee, it does have to go back to the board for reading for approval. And again, that's an opportunity if that reading is not with the intent that the Racial Equity Committee looked at, that public comment can be made again directly to the board to share information back to the board and say, this is not the intent that was the purpose for this policy change. And then again, make comments from there. So thank you for posting the flowchart in the, or the link for the flowchart in the chat. And hopefully that, again, with David being on both committees, I think that will be a great help for us to raise awareness that, hey, this policy is being discussed. Anyone who wants to put in public comment from the Racial Equity Committee, now may be a good time. And because of that agenda and him being a part of that, I think that'll be helpful for our committee.
So additionally, like Sabrina said, a couple meetings ago, we discussed that flow chart for change, right? So when we make that revision, it goes to David, then goes to the policy committee. It might get bounced back to David, and then it might get bounced back to us. So there were a few different areas within that flow chart. So I placed that in the chat just for future reference. If you all want to save that particular chart, I think it's going to be helpful for all of us to understand. In full transparency, one of the things I did ask when we were working on this form was, man, why do I feel like we're creating everything brand new? I know FCPS has been around for so long. Why are we creating this? Why wasn't there something like this before? And I was reminded, which I think was an aha moment for me when I looked at this particular policy revision document, was we're the only that has the ability to propose revisions and changes to different policies. So that is quite a task that we are given, and it's really something that's special, which is why we had to start creating these things brand new. So that to me just says, how much impact we can possibly make moving forward in our committee. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen really quickly so we can start working on our subcommittee presentations. Hold on one second. All right, so now it's time for us to begin reviewing our subcommittee work. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with the Early Childhood, Elementary, Middle, and High School Data Subcommittee, which consists of Jennifer, Nana, Charisse, and Dawn. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to that particular subcommittee's point person to go ahead and review for us some of the work that has been completed with your group.
So Charisse, I know it's been a while since we have gotten together. Charisse was sharing before, but if it is okay with her, I will go ahead and take the lead on the two committees that we worked on. I think it's just the two of us here tonight. And then Charisse, if I missed something, could you please fill in my gap for me?
Absolutely. I'm just going off of a little bit of memory here. So I'll be your backup.
Thank you. So this is where we got stuck last, and it was about the wording. So when we met again after as a small subcommittee, we determined that this work that we were providing, the wording, the changes made, we wanted just to focus on the intent. But not to wordsmith, because that was not our role. We wanted to be quite explicit in the message that we wanted within the change, and that the policy committee, when they met, they would take care of how the language would be expressed from looking at our intent and the changes that we made to our group. So, this committee, we looked at policy 102 for meetings. We looked also at policy 430 for attendance at school. Thank you. So with the policy change for the meetings, we included the word open so that it would read all open meetings would have interpretation services upon request. And we added interpretation services upon request. We felt it was important to have meetings be accessible to all members of the community that requested it. And so we added to that existing language. So I wish Mr. Boffman was here tonight, because he could also fill in the gaps of what he had done prior to, because he had done some extensive research on how to make our meetings more accessible to the community. I'm sure he will be able to share more when we have our next meeting, but it was important that we had equitable access for members to be able to understand and have access to our meetings. And we wanted to make that the intent. For policy 405 for the graduation, we just included the word all, we included each, and we included every, because it was important to be inclusive. So it made it more personalized, so that we're referring to each and every student in Frederick County, and that there would not be a question about that. And then for policy 430, and I think this is where I might need Sharice, because she had a very important point. This was about the attendance at schools. So we wanted to make sure it was clear that students under the age of 21 prior to the first day of schools are legally eligible and highly encouraged, so that it's known that students should be in school. That is the intent. And that despite what previous limited or formal or interrupted education they may have, it should not be a barrier or a way to exclude students from coming to FCPS to be educated. We wanted to make sure they were legally eligible, and we want to encourage that, because we all know in order to be successful citizens, you need to be educated. And we wanted that to be the message for Frederick County Public Schools for all of our learners, including our older students. Sharice, did I capture that well?
Yes, you captured it beautifully. We spent a lot of time, especially on 430. I know Ivania was trying to help us out with this one as well, just trying to make sure the wording was correct, or just what our message was we were trying to get across, but you were able to tackle what we were trying to say perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was amazing. That was awesome. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and move on. Dawn, did you want to share your next steps? I feel like you kind of already did, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't fast enough on turning the pages there.
Okay.
So now we're going to go ahead and hear from gifted, talented, highly able programs, special education, and English language learners subcommittee. And for this particular subcommittee, we have Ivania,
Yes.
Ron, Mr. Harris, and Dawn, this is yours again.
Yes, yes. So I think it's just three of us. I apologize, Ivania. I forgot to include you. We did a combo because our groups were
Okay.
so small. We merged our two. And so we thought we would get more bang for the buck that way. So our summary of this work, we didn't do much with the special education policy because it is so highly regulated by the state and federal government. So we didn't make any changes because basically you really are limited and you really can't make many changes. So where we focused on policy, let's see, 444 for educational equity and excellence. And that was a very important one because that's the policy that actually guides our work as a racial equity committee. And it should also, in my opinion, guide the work of all our board committees because we want to make sure we're having an equitable lens on everything we do here in Frederick County. So we can go to the next slide. We didn't have many changes with it, but one important change we did include was citizenship status. So we have so many identifiers here, but we felt that was also needed to be very clear. Okay. We also added, as we're looking at those resources, allocating resources to achieve fiscal equity and provide the necessary resources required to close achievement and opportunity gaps for all students, we wanted to ensure equitable access and we wanted to include academic programming. And when we were talking about academic programming, we talked about CTC, dual enrollment. Those were the kinds of things that would fall under academic programming that we wanted to ensure that all of our students had access to. The last thing we added was the last one in yellow, and Board Member Bass helped us with that part because we wanted to make sure that it just wasn't work that guided just this committee in particular, but we wanted to make sure that all board committees are working throughout the year. And when they do make their report, because we will be making ours as well in July, that all of us should have something that relates to the equity piece for all of our students, to ensure all of our students are getting the best in what they need here in Frederick County. And it shouldn't just be a siloed effort of, oh, that's the Racial Equity Committee. No, that's all of our committees.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for the last two committees' proposed revisions?
And Ivania, did I miss anything?
Nope, I'm glad you took over. I'm checking my notes and it looks like you said everything that we talked about. Just making sure that we address our immigrant communities and the academic programming and making sure that we have really defining equity. But no, perfect.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
So then the next thing that we would need to do then would be to fill out the form that you just shared so that it would be passed on to Board Member Bass to bring back to the board, correct? Okay, so we'll work on that. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and hear from the Hiring, Recruitment, Retention, and Professional Development of Staff Subcommittee, who is Shanita, Mark, Sarah, and Mr. Boffman.
Thanks, everyone. Move to the next slide. So we looked over a number of different policies and regulations at the end of last year. You can see the numbers we have there, 301 that focuses on recruitment, selection, and employment of teacher personnel. Two other regulations, 336, and then policy 320 that focuses more on non-teaching support personnel staff and their personnel regulations around that. And then the final policy we looked at, which is currently being reviewed by the board, is the Teaching of Controversial Issues, policy 516. During our discussions, we prioritized focusing on the recruitment, selection, and employment of teacher personnel. That policy or regulation was pretty old and hadn't been updated recently. And in a lot of the research that we had done and information that we gathered from through the board and staff, there was a lot of information about what changes have been made in the last decade and to improve the recruitment of staff of color. So we wanted to make sure that we can support that moving forward. And we also had some thoughts that we wanted to add to policy 516, particularly relating to teacher expectations and actually executing that role within their duties. So we can talk a little bit more about those specific pieces on the two policies that we focused on. So the first one, and you can see the link to our actual rec and policy add or revise form there. I note that we have a little change to the form, so we'll probably have to go back through and focus more on the purpose and the intent. But we have a lot of those key elements there to start with.
Would you like me to go ahead and click on the link, Sarah, or no?
You can. It might be a little dense and hard to read on the screen.
Okay.
I'm going to try to summarize what the specific pieces that we went through. And if there are specific questions that might be helpful. I know my eyes get tired this time of day. It might be hard for people to see the smaller font.
Okay.
Sure. So the focus of Regulation 301 is to make sure that FCPS is hiring the best qualified candidates for each position. And the Human Resources supports the hiring process focused on assessing candidate skills, abilities, and relevant background experience. This hadn't been updated since 2005, so there's a lot of changes that have happened within how Human Resources actually goes ahead and identifies who are the most qualified candidates. We had a number of different recommendations that we would hope that the policy committee could consider to make sure that this policy is enshrining the positive steps that have been made to improve the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. So under some of the procedures, we had recommended that FCPS include its commitment to recruiting a diverse applicant pool and outline the strategies that will be implemented to ensure that, that they are capturing a diverse pool of applicants. We also felt that it would be helpful to define what a diverse pool actually is, so we have some sense of what our kind of guidelines and framework is there. We also added that there was a question around subsection E5, where it specified that for someone to be eligible, they needed to be compatible, or the compatibility, of the applicant's philosophy with the system's philosophy. That seemed to be open to a lot of interpretation, and we recommended some clarification on what that actually meant. Another piece we recommended under section 2, subsection F, was to increase the minimum number of applicants that would be selected for internal review. Right now, the number stands at 3, and we felt that if they increase the number, we didn't give a specific number, but significantly increasing that number would increase the likelihood that they would have a much deeper applicant pool that is more representative than what they might be getting with just 3 people. I think those are the main pieces. I'm just looking at the other sheet. We have the just some what do I want to say? We had received a lot of information from central office that we're including in backup documents, and I believe the helpful insights that were suggested in the public comment at the beginning of the meeting were also useful for us to consider as we come back and think about how we can, better prioritize existing FCP staff who are support members who might be wanting to move into teaching, and how to be more competitive with neighboring districts. So that's something we'll kind of take on and review when we come back together. So that's the recommendations that we had in reviewing Regulation 300-1. The next one we reviewed was the Teaching of Controversial Issues, Policy 516. And under that piece, sorry, did I skip a slide? Yes, that's the one, or back one.
I'm sorry, which one, Sarah? The one, the
sorry.
previous one?
516, I think it was the previous one. I wasn't sure which one. Yeah, that's it, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine, you're fine. So this, we had just reviewed the policy, which the purpose is to establish guidelines for the teaching of controversial issues and providing context for the use of historical artifacts in Frederick County schools. We really kind of focused in here on the expectations for the teachers and recognizing that there's some trainings and professional development that might need to go along with the execution and their ability to fulfill this, their obligations under this policy. So some of the just broad recommendations we had as this is being developed is to really strengthen the definition of what constitutes a controversial issue. So we're taking a lot of the guesswork out of what the responsibility is on the shoulders of the teachers. There was a recommendation to expand the context in which controversial issues are recognized and addressed, especially considering hybrid education right now, where the home is often the classroom in many cases. Again, with the goal of trying to take a lot of the burden off of teachers who are doing so much right now and giving them a lot of clarity and specificity on what we're actually expecting of them. And the final recommendation we particularly had with this policy was to detail the specific steps the curriculum, instruction, and innovation staff would be taking to equip teachers and provide them with the assistance necessary to execute this policy. So we're thinking things about being able to address issues in a culturally responsive and sensitive manner, and being able to facilitate conflict resolution that might arise as they're enforcing this policy. So those were our specific recommendations there. And then our next steps, we were continuing to try to gather more data on retention and a deeper dive into specific data on recruitment strategies within race. Right now, all we just have are just broad categories. We have male hires of color, female hires of color, and we don't have a good sense of what that really looks like to get a better sense of what's happening there. And then we're also hoping to reach out to the Equity Office to learn a little bit more about what the professional development opportunities look like. There's been a lot of new efforts that have been happening and been rolled out in the last year and the last few months. And we're just interested to hear how those are going and what they're learning from that process. So I hope that captures everything. I do want, if Shanita and Mark, who I believe are both here, have anything else to add, let me know.
Well done.
Yeah, Sarah, I think you did an outstanding job. Thank you.
It's great teamwork. It's been a pleasure.
I just had one question, and I don't know if you were able to discover this yet in all of the work that you did, and this was incredible. Were you able to find the percentage of teachers of color that we have here for Frederick County Public Schools? I'm only asking because of curiosity. Last week, we also had the educator panel during that Black Lives Matter Week of Action. And I heard a couple of numbers, somewhere between 9 and 12% of our teaching workforce are teachers of color. Were you able to hear what it might be, or an actual number?
I believe yeah, thanks, Dawn, for raising that. I believe we did. I'm trying to remember, it's been a while since I've looked through the data. But the challenge is it's so aggregated. Again, we don't have any specificity, or we have such, I believe I was trying to go through and make an Excel sheet. We do have specificity by individual school, but we don't have that overall data of what it looks like at FCPS. So we could spend the time and go ahead and figure out what that is. It's a worthwhile endeavor. It'd be nice if central office had that just to make it easier, because there are a lot of different schools. But I believe, and I'm trying to remember, Shanita and Mark, that does exist. It's just a little complicated to get to it. And we can play with that some more too, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you all so much. Are there any further questions or comments for this subcommittee that just presented?
I just want to share that that policy committee will review the actual policy. So when looking at those regulations, some of them may have the policy number listed at the top as to what it's related to, because the policy committee is going to look at the broader aspect. And if there isn't a policy specifically for hiring, then that may be something to consider for the policy committee to look at. I quickly glanced as we were talking, and Sarah, feel free to reach out to me and I can do some more research in regards to that. But I didn't see a specific policy in regards to just hiring, but that may be something that the policy committee could look at in general, is to add a policy in regards to that. So just because that's what the policy committee will focus on. Once the policy committee focuses on that, then those regulations can be pulled from that policy to address, and making sure, again, our intent is there.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. That's really helpful. Appreciate it. We will reach out to you.
Yeah, thank you for that point, Sabrina. I want to second that, because that point of not just revising of policies, but also maybe possibly creating and bringing up new ones, I think is something that, I mean, I know like a couple of other subcommittees, you know, like we haven't even thought about that. So I think that's a good point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So now we're going to go ahead and move forward to the school climate and discipline subcommittees, which is Andrea, Mr. Bass, I know you just joined that subcommittee, and Serena. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to this subcommittee. And I believe you all had, Andrea, this is the slideshow you shared with me, correct? Do you want me to pull that up? Oh, we can't hear you, Andrea.
Yes, please.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Okay, thank you. This committee has a unique situation because we've lost two important and valuable members from the committee. As you know, former President Marv Mills, Jennifer Ryan, who worked with FCPS, were very valuable on this committee because they worked with the school system or had access to information that related to the school climate and discipline data that we needed to do the work. So our charge was to analyze suspension and discipline data countywide and identify possible racial inequities, as well as to make recommendations to the Board of Ed to eliminate the identified racial inequities as they relate to suspension and discipline rates of our FCPS students. We know that this is important work because we know that research shows that increased suspensions, increased expulsions relate to the school to prison pipeline. So in order to close that, then we have to address the inequities where they exist. So the questions that we had for the Board of Education were to provide data on the number of complaints of racial ethnic bias, microaggressions, and macroaggressions reported by the school for the last 3 years, Complaints may be from students, parents, public safety, and or community members. And the response was that this data was forthcoming. So we did not have that information yet. We also asked what measures have been put in place to protect students who report cases of bullying, harassment, intimidation, or discrimination. How is the process explained for students who would like to report cases, and how is this information made available to students? And the answer is forthcoming. We asked what types of training that encourage problem solving and conflict resolution have been made available to faculty. The answer is forthcoming. What types of disciplinary protocols, such as restorative practices, have been put in place to prevent conflict and encourage problem solving and conflict resolution? What types of assessments have been done regarding these practices, and what is the evidence that they are working? And so we know that when Dr. Beck spoke with us last time, she said that they were still collecting the data on that there is no clear connection yet that shows restorative practices necessarily had a connection with student success or the reduction of expulsions or suspensions. So we are awaiting data regarding suspension and expulsion rates per racial and or ethnic groups for FCPS. I'm glad to know that Mr. Bass will be joining our group. Perhaps he is more closely connected so that he can get that information for us. But that is the information that we would need to do the work. We have also been asked by the Ombuds for FCPS, Ms. Sabrina Nail, to review policies from other schools related to the Confederate flag and make recommendations that could be incorporated into the dress code and or bullying policy. So that is another opportunity for us. And so right now we need data. So we don't have that information to complete the charge. And then as I have said before, the committee needs to be put in contact with persons who can respond to the questions posed to the Board of Ed. Dana Falls, the Director of Student Services, was our contact person. We were in contact with Jennifer Bingman, who was also working on collecting data for us. So right now, well, at the time that I created this presentation, there was just myself and Serena Lassett. Again, I'm happy to work with Mr. Bass, and hopefully, he will be able to provide more direction and connect us to the people that we need to be connected with to do this important work.
Thank you for presenting. I want to say, please, everybody, definitely call me David. That's definitely fine. And some of the data I think I did receive yesterday from Dr. Albin, and so I can share that with the subcommittee, and we can obviously that will help us moving forward.
Awesome, thank you.
And Andrea, I know since David has now moved on to your particular subcommittee, I wanted to just check in to make sure, do you still feel like as though you all need more people to get moving? Would you like to open it up to ask for volunteers to additionally join your subcommittee?
Of course, absolutely.
What do you feel your subcommittee needs so that we can help you to help you all get what you need. And thank you also for doing all this work on the presentation too.
Sure. Yeah, we need someone who, I think Serena was here, but had to leave, so I can't speak for her. But I just know that for myself, not being a part of FCPS, I teach at Frederick Community College, so I know Jennifer Ryan, for example, knew of people immediately that she could get in contact with, and she knew what questions to ask. She knew of specific policies that were in place, so she knew how to talk about them and to name them. And so definitely anyone who is connected with FCPS, who are familiar with their disciplinary policies, we'd love to have someone on the team, on the committee, working with us.
Are there any volunteers who would like to go ahead and join this subcommittee?
So I think I'm probably the only FCPS teacher right now that we have, because our other teacher is out on maternity leave. So, and I know that probably limits us some. And I know that we also have people appointed from Dr. Albin, like Dr. Harris and Jen Bingman, that also work. Could we also maybe reach out to them for support? I know that they have also worked on my committees, the 2 committees that I'm already assigned to. But I am willing to share, of course, because I don't think at this time we have any other teachers on the committee besides myself now. So, and I am assigned.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Ivania has also volunteered to help. So thank you so much, Ivania.
So what we can do, Andrea, is we could put I'll put it out in our email where I share all these other docs after this meeting this evening. I'll go ahead, I'll put it out. Thank you, Ivania, for additionally volunteering, and we can see if there's any other FCPS employees that might want to join. So I'll frame it in that way when I go ahead and send that email out. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Are there any other further questions for this particular subcommittee before we move on to our final 2?
And this committee was school discipline data? Yes?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to move on to our final 2 committees. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Hey, Elisa, it's Tia. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment to share, if that's okay. So, Andrea, we haven't gotten to the subcommittee that I'm on yet, but I think we ran into some very similar roadblocks in terms of not finding the information available around policies that related to our subcommittee. And one of the things that we looked at, oh, here we go, we're coming up, you'll see. One of the things that we looked at was, finding policies and even potentially data, outside of the county to support the work that we're trying to do and to support the policies that we may actually end up having to create. So that it's just a thought for you there. If it doesn't exist within the county, maybe the work is we've got to come up with it.
Thank you, Tia, for adding that on. Absolutely. I agree with you, Tia. That's definitely something that we had done in our subcommittee. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the Culturally Sensitive and Inclusive Curriculum and Instruction Subcommittee. And I'm going to ask Keisha to go ahead.
And hopefully you guys can still hear me. Great, awesome. So again, I'm gonna sort of summarize, and Tia, Lisa, anyone else on the committee, if I leave anything out, please feel free to interject. But we met and discussed several, to even begin with, like Tia said, we sort of we're hoping for answers to a lot of our questions, and we just found there was a lot of vagueness, some things that were forthcoming, but other areas where we're like, what's in the essential curriculum? And it was we got kind of like broad answers. So we very much felt stuck. And so next we sort of went and looked at several of the relevant policy, including the proposed policy that Sarah discussed in her report out. And actually it's funny because our comments were almost identical. So I think if we're providing feedback on that, we should probably work together. So it's great to see that synergy. But definitely we had questions about sort of how they were defining controversial issues. We had with concerns with I think the onus placed on the teachers. And so when they're saying things like you have to present things in an impartial and objective manner, what does that mean in the context of controversial issues when, again, it was just a lot of teachers have to do this, they have to present it in an appropriate manner, they have to adequately present their views without really mentioning training. I think as far as they go in training is sort of there's assistance and advice available, but we kind of felt like if you're putting this out there, it really has to be more systematic. So it shouldn't be on the onus of the teacher to know that they need to go somewhere to figure out something out. It really should be something that's available across the board. And then we looked at some current policies like policy 500, which is the curriculum and courses of study. And again, I think our overall insight was just everything is super vague. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to have some specificity around having an anti-racist curriculum. So for the curriculum and course of study, I think the only thing that was mentioned specifically was just anything that's, materials proposed around HIV prevention education classes have to be approved by the board. And then everything else was just very general and didn't specify specific areas. Similarly with, selection and review of instructional materials, we just really felt like there was a need to sort of have a more comprehensive policy around the anti-racist curriculum. We just felt what was out there was really broad. So there wasn't anywhere where we could just be, adding in a word and that would potentially make a difference. We felt potentially we needed to add stuff. And then with sort of policy 516, that's a very reactive policy, which is fine. I mean, I think we do need some policies that are reactive, but again, we were in addition to that, we really need something that is sort of comprehensive, talking about how anti-racist curriculum, how, cultural inclusion is being included in the curriculum. Yes, sorry. So I think I said all this stuff. Let me just see. Yeah, and like I said, I think we really struggled and we thought definitely want to provide feedback on the policy 516, but then also really thought, and I was happy to see this form. That's unfortunately I didn't have a chance to look at prior to this meeting, but I think really our guidance is sort of going to be probably recommending an additional policy. And as Tia mentioned, really sort of looking at best practices because we know there's a lot of work. It's a very, very timely thing, and there's a lot of work being done on more of an anti-racist, culturally sensitive curriculum. And so just kind of wanting to learn from others. And with the policy, really focus, we know we can't do the how, but sort of providing those insights as documentation, but also making sure we're framing the what with enough specificity that's really, going to have the intended impact. Yes, and then I know that, and one last thing that we know it kind of overlaps with the teacher subcommittee, but really making sure that in addition to sort of defining what the curriculum is, really making sure that we're giving the teachers the training and everything they need to be effective in doing the work because, there's a lot being thrown on them. And we see that in the hybrid thing, and we just really want to make sure we're giving them the tools and it's not just another thing we're saying you have to do without giving them the resources to effectively do it. So in the interim, our individual subcommittee members are doing that discovery work so we can find the data and the case studies and the things that can help us figure out how to frame this. We're hoping to find even policy models from other school districts that we can use as a template. And then we're going to be sort of meeting to sort of discuss what we found and talk about next steps. So, Elisa, Tia, did I leave anything out?
No, I think you covered it very well.
Thank you, Keisha. It was perfect. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the curriculum subcommittee?
I think I I want to say, in terms of the controversial teaching of controversial issues, yeah, I feel I don't know, I feel bad or something about but this is where we're at, right? It did come to the policy committee, and then to the board. And so an update has passed. I had gotten, some feedback from Lisa Bronfman and from, I believe, another community member, and we were, engaging a little bit on that. But I guess I just want to make sure everyone's aware that it did, and I'll double check this, but I think I'm remembering this correct. We did pass an update to this policy, and yeah, so I want to say that, and I don't know, we can, I suppose, take a look and see if any other updates are needed going forward.
I'd just like to say that I'm happy that it's a discussion that we're having, and I'm happy to hear the word anti-racist and anti-racism, because for so long it's, well, we're not there yet, we're not ready for it, or people here in the community, they're not ready, they're not there yet. I don't know when that arrival time will be, but the rest of us are ready to have different conversations. And I think it's needed and important when you listen to your students and how they're treated in schools. We need to be able to do things differently and start to pay close attention to what it is that we're saying versus what we're silent over. Talking about anti-racism is the start, and we need to move from there forward. So I'm glad that you all discussed that.
Yeah, and so I hope I reflected our committee correctly, but you'll see in the slides, I never use that term in talking about, I think this is a perfect reflection of, I think, probably even like 2 months ago when we were drafting it, even the phrase is potentially like, I mean, it's the phrase that's needed, but I think for some people it's like jarring. But I do think it reflects what we're looking at. So it's not in the slides, but I'm hoping it will be in the notes so that we can really reflect like this is what we are looking at. And I know when we were in a committee, we were talking about models and finding templates of anti-racist curriculum. So I want to make sure that's reflected.
Are you talking about the minutes that I'm taking tonight, or are you talking about a different set of notes? Let me be clear.
Yes, with the minutes you're taking. So that's just a plug.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with our theme for this evening of what Clint Smith said, making sure that it's what is needed, not what people necessarily want to hear, but what they need to hear. And I think that that's important to keep in the back of our minds as we move through our work in this committee. Thank you all so much. So our final committee is the Extracurricular Activities Committee, which consisted of Jay, myself, Serena, as well as Sabrina. Serena's our point person. I think she stepped out. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sabrina to go ahead and present, if you don't mind.
As long as you're my backup, then we're good. We'll try and get through this. So the extracurricular activities, we met and discussed questions regarding extracurricular, co-curricular clubs, and policies regarding the racial equity. So we primarily discussed policy 509 and the concerns that we had about the equity and accountability was a big part for the betterment of FCPS students. So we looked at some racial slurs and discipline issues and things like that we wanted to make sure were addressed for how to progress forward and consequences and different things. We also considered definitions that were not within the policy, like WF grades, extracurricular versus co-curricular, and the use, it was gender specific regarding male and female, but was not inclusive of other gender identities. So we listed additional questions and about the regulations, again, looking for our intent to be considered in the regulation and to have that reviewed to advocate for more focus in general on equity in regards to athletic and extracurricular data and guidance, because there is not the same, not a lot of guidance that's obtained in regards to race with extracurricular activities and situations that may have occurred in regards to that. Next slide, please. So our focus on policy 509 did not address attendance or student conduct standards for participation. There is a guide for student athletes and parents from the FCPS coaching handbook regarding attendance and behavior, but the policy didn't really specifically state that. So you had to go to a separate location to find out information about that. So putting it all inclusive, we thought was important to do that. Adding a section to that policy emphasizing equal access for all students, again, connecting it back to policy 444, the equity policy, and include more than just the athletic program. So including band, including co-curricular clubs, different things like that. And again, focusing on that equal access. And then again, currently, oh, 1 second, go back. Working on the proposal to present. So again, we're working on that now to present that forward to the policy committee. So we plan on, again, providing that information to hopefully to David before the next committee meeting and hopefully before the next policy committee meeting. However, it's going to take some time so that we all can understand to schedule those policy reviews for the policy committee to look at. There is a process on their end that they go through to determine which policy would be up next to be heard. However, that is something, again, once we get them that documentation, David then submits that to them and then they move forward. So we would like to also just contact the FCPS athletic supervisor or meet with him to get a better understanding, and that's Mr. Kevin Kendrow, to run through some questions and clarifications and use some of the data if they have the data, or question if that data needs to be written into the policy that we are looking for some of that data, or if that's in a regulation. But how can we obtain some of that data for further policy improvement and to improve equity? And then again, we want to track certain information for more transparency about how race, ethnicity affects equity for our students and our coaches. So again, some of that information data-wise was not obtained, especially if it's a coach for coaches or for support staff that helps with the coaching. So that might be something that we want to look at also and get some clarity. Or is that something that's already collected that, again, is not in that policy and just we're not aware of? So that's why we want to gather more information from Mr. Kendra.
Are there any questions or comments for the extracurricular subcommittee? Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Sabrina, for presenting for our group. Right now, we're going to start summarizing our meeting really quickly and talk about our action items for the next committee meeting. And it looks like we might be able to buy back 10 minutes of our time. So let's do this. All right, so action items. Our whole committee actions. Public comment to our committee. This is something that we talked about as an executive subcommittee. So Dawn, please jump in if I'm forgetting any part of that conversation from our exec subcommittee meeting the last time. we really felt strongly that it was important for us to, as subcommittees, take a look at the public comments that pertain and align to our particular subcommittee's work. And then look at that to help drive our future actions as subcommittees. Although as committees of the board, we don't directly respond to public comment, we do believe it's important for our work to be partially driven by the community, because that's who we represent as community members. What we're going to do, and again, Dawn, Sabrina, please jump in if I'm forgetting any piece of this, but what we're going to do is basically take those public comments, and we're going to go ahead and start to disseminate those to the subcommittees that they kind of belong to. So for example, that one this evening for SROs, that might possibly go to our discipline subcommittee. So we might send you all that one. Dawn, is there anything I'm forgetting with that? Okay. Okay,
No,
Sabrina, is there? Okay, Sabrina, is there anything? No? Okay.
No, you did great. Thank you.
Okay, and then we will be, okay, so there's two, oh, you know what? I know exactly what happened here. Hold on one second. Let me go ahead, and so this is actually what happens when you try to adjust your slides as you find people presenting. I have to go back in and refresh the page because I adjusted that slide. So hold on one second. All right, let me go back in and present that. Now that page looks correct. So hold on. Oh, come on, I'm gonna make it. I'm still gonna buy us back 10 minutes. Let's do this. Okay, ready? Really quickly, I probably only have seconds. So we are going to do two things with the board. So we are going to present to them just a quick update on how we're doing as a committee. That quick update is tentatively scheduled for May 2021. And I say tentative because we are able to move that date for just a quick update if need be. However, our big presentation, which is our annual report, that will be presented to the board most likely in June of this year. So it's so important that within this next month, we begin working in our subcommittees on getting these policy recommendations and revisions sent over to David Bass so that he can then go ahead and send them over to the policy committee. Our next committee of a whole meeting, Dawn, help me out. Our next committee of a whole meeting, we are skipping, we usually skip a month and then go the next month to give our subcommittees that a good several weeks to get a good chunk of work done.
Right.
So we would skip March and go to April.
I believe that is how it's supposed to be, yes. But I don't remember the date. I can't remember which Wednesday it is because we have rescheduled twice, which has thrown the calendar in my mind off.
So I believe we were third Wednesday, right?
Wednesday? Okay.
It is, yes, so it is already scheduled for April the 21st.
Okay, thank you. Sabrina to the rescue.
Yeah. So our whole meeting, April 21st. So that would mean that our subcommittees need to have their Google Slides presented to us or submitted to us no later than the 2nd of April. So April 2nd, slides would be due from subcommittees. Slides due from sub. And just a quick reminder, the reason that slides are due so early is because they're due to the administrative assistant to the board 10 business days prior. So that gives our executive subcommittee just a couple business days to look at them, to review them prior to them being uploaded to board docs. That is a hard deadline, unfortunately. So anything that's not submitted by April 2nd wouldn't be included. So it's just important to know to make sure that everyone meets in their subcommittees and completes their Google Slides before that April deadline. All right, 8 minutes spare. I'll stop screen sharing really quickly. Are there any questions, comments for the good of the group? All right. Thank you all so much. I want to give a quick thank you again to, whoops, was that someone? Okay, I want to give a quick thank you again to Marv Mills, Jennifer Ryan, FCPS teacher, as well as Dr. Jackie Duget, who served on our Racial Equity Committee for since the beginning. And so I just want to thank them again for all of their work that they put into our subcommittee, our committee as a whole. And again, in the words of Clint Smith, tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, and silence is the residue of fear. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your good work. And then if I could just ask for Sabrina, David, our new chair, and Don to stay on for a few minutes. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.